Good evening. Thank you for tuning in today. This is Danube Week. My name is Joost Ouendag, and I will be talking about the Romantic Danube cruise in just a few minutes. I just wanted to, mention a few of the things that we've been doing this week. To start off with, a wonderful program that my friend Father Pius did. He is with the Goetwijk Monastery. That was on Monday. If you haven't seen it, you should tune in. He's a hoot, and he's just a very interesting character. Tomorrow we have Professor Elmeyer, who is, and with a professor, of course, you think about someone who does very academic things, but Professor Elmeyer has some very, instructs in very different ways. He's a dance instructor, so that is also something that you shouldn't miss. We will now just start with an introduction on the Romantic Danube, and right after we've done that, I will be here to answer any questions you may have.
This beguiling 8-day itinerary showcases some of the Danube River's favorite cities, plus legendary landscapes along the way. Your journey begins with an overnight in Budapest, Hungary. Known as the Paris of the East, the impressive architecture and culture are sure to draw you in. Next up, Vienna, Austria's capital, and its fascinating cultural treasures, where you'll enjoy another overnight stay. Then it's on to Goetwijk Abbey, a Viking exclusive, where monks work and worship just as they have for more than 900 years. You'll sail on to enchanting Passau, Germany, a quaint town that in ancient times was once a Roman colony. Your Viking journey concludes with an overnight in charming Regensburg, giving you plenty of time to explore the heart of its medieval city centre, a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Let's talk about the Viking way and what it means to travel with Viking on any of the rivers of Europe, or for that matter, the rest of the world. At Viking, we believe that people travel to get to know other cultures, other people, and people have lives and people have jobs. And this has led us to incorporate elements of local life and elements of working life into our program offering. We call one category of these experiences local life experiences. Another category is working world experiences. And then finally, we also make a point to bring relationships that we have forged over the years into our product offering. On the Romantic Danube, for instance, we have worked very hard with an abbey to create a program that is very, very unique on the Danube. We also have direct access to the Vienna Boys Choir. Through Carina, we have really good relationships with Highclere Castle. And those experiences we have listed under the header privileged access, because these are experiences that you would not be able to have on your own. You would not be able to have them without Viking. On the Romantic Danube, there are quite a few ways of experiencing the Viking way of shore excursions. Local life, for instance, is something that you will encounter during the Heurigen dinner outside of Vienna, where you meet locals and sit down in a vineyard to drink that year's wine. It's a tradition in Vienna that only the wine of that particular year can be drunk at the vineyard under certain very specific conditions. And it's a great way to experience a bit of outdoor life as the Viennese like to do it. At the same time, at the Naschmarkt, also in Vienna, you can get a glimpse of what the Viennese take home to cook a dinner or to simply snack a little bit. Naschen is the Austrian word for snacking. So Naschmarkt really means snack market, and it's a lot more than that. It really gives you a very broad view of everything that you can experience in the Viennese kitchen. You will get a glimpse of the working world if you go backstage at the Spanish riding school to see how the workers in the stables groom the horses, how the horses are taken out to practice for the world famous shows that they put on for spectators at certain times of the day. In Regensburg, or rather just outside in the countryside, you can experience what it's like to run a microbrewery, to work with different strands of hops and grains in order to create the beers that the region around Regensburg is very famous for. And then we have some combinations of things where you could say we combine perhaps privileged access with what working world is like. A perfect example of how we can combine certain aspects of the Viking way into one excursion is what we have done with the Abbey of Gutwijk, a Benedictine abbey that sits on top of a hill overlooking the Wachau Valley. Here, we follow the monks in their daily lives, but we also give you a peek into aspects of abbey life that are normally not accessible to the public. We've created this program especially for Viking. And finally, behind the scenes at the Vienna Boys Choir is an excursion where, with very small groups, we provide you with a small private concert of one of the most famous boys choirs in the world in Vienna, through a relationship that we have forged over the years. So each one of our cruises has these elements in them. And today, as I talk about the Romantic Danube, I will give you a flavor of the local life, the working world, and the privileged access aspects of the cruise as I walk you through this presentation. So here we are with our Romantic Danube itinerary, our cruise from Budapest to Regensburg. This is a cruise that you can book in both directions, but for today we'll focus on the direction where we start in Hungary's capital. And I would say that it would be a great idea if you want to really experience Budapest to its fullest, to take the opportunity to book a few nights before you cruise with us on an extension. You can do that either in a hotel of what I would say is the standard that many people have grown accustomed to with Viking, or you can book a premium hotel. Either way, Budapest is really worth a few extra days if you have the time. There are things like the Grand Market, where you can buy anything that anywhere in Hungary would end up on dinner plates. It's a fantastic, enormous, cavernous experience of food from all over the country. There are the parliament buildings to see and visit. There are streets to walk. There are beautiful cafes. You must have hot chocolate in Budapest, because hot chocolate in many parts of the world is a little milk or a little water with a little bit of cocoa. And in Budapest, they figured out that hot chocolate really needs to be molten chocolate. It is among the best in the world that you can get anywhere, I would imagine. And you must have cake. In Budapest, you must have cake. And again, in order to do all these things, to visit the Széchenyi baths, the spectacular palaces of bathing, to see some of the museums in Budapest, I would highly recommend that you spend a few extra days. The cruise begins in Budapest, where you arrive to board the ship that is docked right under the chain bridge most of the time, in the middle of the city that is dissected by the river. And after some time in Budapest, you will travel along the Danube Bend. That is that first curve in the river that you can see on the map, where the sheer cliffs on both sides of the river create a very dramatic scenery. And as you travel then on through the night, the next morning you will wake up in Vienna. You'll have 2 glorious days in Vienna. And then as cruising resumes, you travel again through one of the loveliest parts on the Danube, through the Wachau Valley, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and with good reason. It is your proverbial landscape of little villages, church towers along the river, vineyards on both sides, old castle ruins. It's really a very, very iconic stretch of river. And after going through the Wachau, you travel again a little bit in the evening and in the early morning to arrive in Passau. Passau sits at a confluence of 3 rivers. 2 rivers empty into the Danube, and that basically means that wherever you are in Passau, you will see one of these 3 rivers, the Danube, the Ilz, and the Inn. And then beyond Passau, the Danube becomes a little narrower. It's not quite as wide as it is in parts of Austria, although it's still a formidable river. And eventually you will dock in the city of Regensburg, where your cruise comes to an end after spending some time there, not just discovering Regensburg, but also the surrounding countryside. You can travel all the way from Regensburg to Nuremberg or to Munich on the days that you have in that city. So our voyage begins in Budapest. The slide that you see here shows the view from the hills of Buda to the other side. The flatter part of Budapest is simply known as Pest. And the man in the foreground is King Matthias, who played a very important role in the unification of what today we know as Hungary. From the Fisherman's Bastion, that's the structure with the 3 turrets, you have some of the most spectacular views all over the city. It's a very classic view. Of course, if you have arrived a little early on the day of embarkation, you may want to do a little bit of exploring on your own. The market hall is always an enormous favorite. It's not open every day, but most of the weekdays you will be able to go there and maybe get a little bit of salami or a piece of Hungarian cheese or local honey. It's really one of the great places to get a sense of the flavors and the smells that make up Hungary and that make up Hungarian food. Speaking of food, I would now like to share a video clip that shows Karina cooking goulash, which is the national dish in Hungary. It's by now it's spread all over Central Europe because it's easy to make and it's delicious. If you want your own recipes for goulash, either the Hungarian version or the Viennese version, you can go on the Viking website and you will find the recipes there.
Budapest's Great Market Hall dates to 1896. It's a draw for both tourists and the locals in search of the very best in fresh food and delicacies. Located just blocks from our Viking ships, I'm exploring it with my friend Agnes. Today we're preparing one of Hungary's national dishes, the hearty goulash, a meaty soup that originated with the region's herdsmen, or gulyás. It's a favorite that quickly spread throughout Europe.
We're back and we're ready to cook our goulash, and it's a typical Hungarian dish.
First, we need onions. The onion gives the stew taste and consistency. So now we're gonna saute the onions in vegetable oil.
How much salt do you want?
To taste. And just stir a little bit and cover. We're gonna cut the beef and cube it.
Okay, so we've cut our meat.
And now we're gonna add paprika. So before adding paprika, always remove the pot from the heat.
But this is not spicy. This is a sweet
This is
one.
the sweet one, yes. We're gonna add peppercorns and bay leaves and the meat. We're gonna add water now.
Okay.
Just to cover. 2 more things to add. 1 sweet pepper and 1 tomato.
Okay.
And cover and simmer. Always low heat. Now we have time to clean the vegetables. Okay, now we're gonna make csipetke noodles. So we need 1 egg, but we use only 1/3 of this egg.
All right.
And add some salt, please.
So you're taking out 2/3 and leaving 1/3.
Now I will add the flour and you will use your fingers to knead the dough. After a while, you will be able to push and roll, just knead it.
Just knead it. Yeah, no, it's starting to come together. But it does start off as a very messy thing.
Always add some flour on the plate because they are sticky. So just 1 small pinch, roll, and that's it.
They look like Tic Tacs.
Yes, Tic Tac. Yeah.
About the same size and about the same dimensions.
It cooks very fast. We will add this just 5 minutes before finishing the soup. Now it's time to add the veggies. Smells good.
It smells really good.
Let's see if the meat
And it
is
looks
tender. Perfect. So it's time to add parsnips, carrots, garlic, and caraway seed. We add a teaspoon of ground caraway seed. The soup, please. More water, not too much. When parsnips and carrots are half tender, potatoes go in.
Still smells good, better and better.
Delicious. So let's taste 1 potato. Very soft. So please add the csipetke noodles Just 5 minutes and they are done. Okay, that was the last step.
And now we get to the best part.
Yeah, sure, we go and eat.
Let's go.
On day 2 of the cruise, you start your morning with a tour of the pest side of the city, the flatter part which has a lot of the grand structures of Budapest, the National Opera House, the Parliament buildings, a lot of houses that were built in Budapest's heyday in the late 19th and early 20th century. There's a lot of Art Nouveau architecture in Budapest. It's actually one of the cities in Europe that's famous for it. You will drive over Hero Square, which is, if you will, a lesson in Hungarian history, in sculptures and in monuments and in statues. Then you cross the Danube into Budapest Castle District. And finally, after visiting the Fisherman's Bastion and the Matthias Church, you will be on your way through the Hungarian countryside to catch up with your ship just before the ship starts sailing through the Danube Bend, that very spectacular stretch of river just before the ship crosses the border into Slovakia on its way to Vienna. On day 3, you wake up in Vienna. And Vienna is the erstwhile capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And when the emperor was Charles V, the saying was that he was an emperor over a realm where the sun didn't set, because it was the largest empire at the time in the world. And Vienna is really a city that, as far as the size is concerned, seems a little disproportionate to how small Austria really is these days. And that has everything to do with the fact that it's really the city that symbolizes the heyday of that empire. This is why you have these grand palaces from the Baroque period. You have the flourishing in that same time, the flourishing of classical music. And it makes Vienna just such an incredible city to spend the next 2 days in. And we cannot wait on that morning of day 3, we cannot wait to share it with you. And this is why there are so many different ways of showing you Vienna. There is the panoramic tour that gives you a broad overview. And that's really a good introduction, because after all, you'll spend the next 2 days there. And to start off with just getting an overview is probably a really good way of doing it. You can do that either on a coach, or you can join a guide that will take you into Vienna subway. A very clean system, a very swift system that takes you to places in a most convenient way without a coach ever having to find a spot to park. And it allows you to spend some time with the Viennese as they go to work or go grocery shopping. My preferred way of travel. Of course, it has to be something that you do when you feel good and when you are willing and able for that day to walk a little bit more than you would normally do on a panoramic tour. From the days of the waltz and from the days of Mozart and Strauss, Vienna has maintained its love for music. One of the things that we offer you in Vienna is to go behind the scenes with the Vienna Boys Choir, one of the most famous choirs in the world. They have an institute where the young men live. This is where they get all of their classes. They go to school just like any other kid their age, and then they spend an awful lot of time being groomed in this grand tradition of music that is so endemic everywhere you go in Vienna. By the way, if that's your taste, Vienna even has incredible jazz clubs. So it is a city that really pulls out all the stops when it comes to culture, popular and high culture. The museums that you can visit in Vienna, there is a museum quarter that I would highly recommend for anyone that likes the style that we sometimes call Art Nouveau or Jugendstil. There's a museum that is dedicated just to that has probably the best collection of works by Egon Schiele, one of the grand masters of the movement. You can go to the Belvedere Palace, and as a matter of fact, we have created an experience around the Belvedere Palace where you can dance, where you can learn a little bit about the waltz, but where you also will see some of the art collections there. Among them, Gustav Klimt's famous Kiss painting, probably one of the best known works of that period in Viennese art history. For your second day in Vienna, we also have lined up a number of shore excursions that allow you to explore different facets of this incredible city. For instance, we will have a local chef that takes you over the Naschmarkt. The Naschmarkt is the century-old market in the heart of Vienna, where people go to get their groceries and their fruits and vegetables, but also their little nice sweet bites or their savory bites. And this is where the word Naschmarkt comes from. Naschen means snacking. And it is a place where you will not just see people with big bags of cabbage and potatoes and apples and bananas, but also where they will carry paper bags with little snacks that they're munching on as they walk home or as they explore the city a little bit more. And you get to do this with them. Then there is an opportunity to go behind the scenes at the Lipizzaner stallions. As you probably have heard, one of the things that Vienna is famous for is the presentation of these stallions in the Spanish riding school for the public, where they perform. And that in and by itself is an incredible experience for which you can go online and get your tickets. These performances do not happen every day, and sometimes they're sold out very far in advance. But I would encourage you to explore, if this is what you really want to do, to explore this even a little bit ahead of time. On the ship, we'll be able to help you if we can to get you tickets, but to go behind the scenes is a completely different experience. Here you get to see the horses a little bit more up close, you get to meet the people that take care of the horses, and you will understand how it all works. The inner workings of the Spanish riding school are very, very interesting. There are a lot of traditions. There's a lot of know-how, of course, that goes into taking care of these incredible animals. And that is what the theme of this entire experience is. In the evening, we have a Mozart and Strauss concert lined up for you. It's something that has been curated very carefully to give you a broad overview of the kind of music that Vienna is so famous for all around the world. And it is a little playful. There's a tiny bit of interaction with the musicians, and that is very much in keeping with the tradition of classical music. Mozart primarily was an entertainer. He made it a point to have people laugh a little bit in his shows and to keep the whole thing a little lighthearted. And we do this too, albeit in a spectacular setting that reminds you of the era of Mozart. Frescoes on the ceilings, columns with a lot of decorations, and so on and so forth. We generally bring you to a palace, to one of the urban palaces that Vienna is so rich in, to enjoy the music of Mozart and Strauss. You could also roam a little further afield, venture into neighboring Slovakia to get an overview of Bratislava. Bratislava sits right between Budapest and Vienna on the Danube River. And you can think of Bratislava as a mini Vienna, if you will. It reminds you a little bit of that city, but it also has its own flavor. Slovakia obviously used to be part of Czechoslovakia. It's a country all of its own, and it has traditions all of its own. Bratislava is the capital of Slovakia, so some of the buildings that you will see will remind you of that. The Parliament building, the Palace of the President is a very opulent building just on the edge of the old city. And we spent quite a few hours in Bratislava. It's a bit of a travel. It's about a little over an hour to get there. You cross an international border, which is always great fun. And it really gives you a good overview of what that city has to offer. Of course, if there's any city in the world where you would like to learn how to waltz properly on the music of Mozart and Strauss, that would also be Vienna. And we have created this experience where you actually go to a very venerable institution, a dancing school, where on a beautiful parquet floor, we will have Austrian teachers that show you just how to do it. And you get to dance on the music of Strauss and Mozart. Finally, there is a way to explore the Viennese countryside on an e-bike, which allows you to break a little bit of a sweat, but not too much, and see an aspect of Austria that thus far you probably haven't explored yet, as you are in the middle of a city. It's where the Austrians themselves, the residents of Vienna, like to spend their weekends in the Viennese woods or along the Danube. And we recreate this experience on a bicycle if you are somewhat actively inclined. Whatever else you do, you will have some free time in Vienna, and it is very important to spend some time in a coffee house. The coffee house is such an integral part of Viennese culture that it would be a shame for you to miss it. And who wouldn't like a piece of cake? What you see here in the picture is a piece of Sachertorte, which combines the flavors of apricots and chocolate into a cake that has gone around the world, made famous first by the Hotel Sacher. And the cafe in Hotel Sacher is just one of many places in Vienna where you can have this experience. One of my favorites is Café Landmann. And overall, the idea of a Viennese coffee house was that you would get your coffee and maybe a piece of cake, and then you would read the newspaper. And particularly the artists, painters, or writers, or poets, they would spend hours reading the papers, talking to other artists and philosophers and people that didn't have a lot of money, that could sit indoors, read the papers that they couldn't afford to buy, all on one cup of coffee. So the tradition is to spend hours in a coffee house in Vienna. You wouldn't need to spend hours in there, but it's certainly something that I would really recommend for you to do. And don't be shy about ordering a second piece of cake, because that is what the Viennese like to do as well.
The year was 1832. Vienna was thriving with the Austrian Empire in full bloom under Emperor Francis I. The graceful waltz and composer Johann Strauss Sr. had captured the Viennese imagination. And a new taste was born when Prince Wenzel von Metternich demanded a special dessert for an important function. Through a twist of fate, the imposing task fell upon the shoulders of a young apprentice, Franz Sacher. Toiling feverishly, he concocted a delectable combination of chocolate, apricot jam, and whipped cream, the Sacher Torte, which, it's said, delighted Metternich's guests. In 1876, son Edward Sacher built upon his father's reputation, opening Vienna's exclusive, luxurious Hotel Sacher. After World War II, the hotel fell into Russian, then British hands during the occupation, before the family restored its beauty and traditions, including one that might surprise you: special treatment for dog guests. The policy began long ago with owner Anna Sacher, who always had her dogs close by. Of course, many human faces have also been greeted warmly into these opulent surroundings. Hotel Sacher feels like a living museum, a fascinating time capsule of country and culture, where every wall speaks volumes about the intriguing past that unfolded here. Even in the cafe, which also happens to be the perfect spot to experience history with your taste buds. The Sacher Torte, with its secret recipe that's still made almost entirely by hand. Hotel Sacher is a rare treasure and a reminder of the many wonders just waiting to be explored in Vienna.
The next morning, we really need you to get up quite early, because this is the day where river cruising reveals itself in all its glory. And that's only a little bit of an overstatement. It really is that great of an experience to be on the sun deck as the ship glides through the Wachau Valley. Austria's Wachau Valley is not a UNESCO World Heritage Site for nothing. It is one of the most spectacular river landscapes that you can see anywhere. And it has these little villages with the church towers. It has hilltop castles. It has rolling hills with vineyards. It is really mile for mile one of the best experiences on this cruise. And you would want to enjoy this from the aquavit terrace or from the sun deck. You will get yourself a little warm coffee, and maybe you put on a little sweater to have this experience as the sun rises over the valley. That's how I would do it anyhow. rest assured that throughout the day, the landscape is just spectacular. So even if you're not an early riser, you will thoroughly enjoy this day. And one of the great things that you will experience on this day is your visit to Gutwijk Abbey. And Gutwijk Abbey's relationship with Viking is such a good example of how we like to present you the destinations that you visit. It's a perfect example of what the Viking way all entails. We spend a lot of time with the abbots and with some monks and with Karina and our product team to put together a program that really fleshes out what life is like in an abbey such as this. It's a working world. An abbey is not just a beautiful church and frescoes and museums where a lot of art is stored and put on display. It's also a place where monks have a role to play in the social network that they're so much the center of. So there are monks, for instance, that go out from the abbey every day to minister in the little parishes, in the little communities around the abbey. There are people that are involved in forestry. There are people that are involved in winemaking. And then there are the people that are involved in putting together this spectacular program where you really go behind the scenes to understand what the abbey is all about. What you see here in this slide is one of those really spectacular moments that you'll have. There is a stairwell in the building that was built for the visit of an emperor, and therefore the building is called the Kaisertrakt. And as you walk in, there is this stairwell. It's 3 stories, and on the ceiling there is one of the most spectacular Baroque ceiling paintings anywhere in the world. This one was done by Paul Troga, and it has a really interesting, I would say, a really interesting 20th century aspect to it. You will look up to the ceiling and you will wonder how it stays in place, because it's massive. There aren't very many columns that seem to hold it in place. And precisely that was one of the problems that they had to solve with modern engineering, because at some stage a number of years ago, the ceiling was in danger of collapsing on its own, under its own weight. And there's a modern structure that you will be able to see if you want to, a very modern structure that holds up this ceiling. And it's precisely this kind of behind the scenes look that we provide you with almost at every twist and turn as you tour the abbey. As a matter of fact, if you watched Monday night's program, you may have seen something that was put together by our friends at Gutwijk. If you haven't, I would recommend that you go into the Viking.TV website and find it, because it's really interesting to have a look at what they have to tell you directly. But also, I'm going to share a little video with you that we made in the initial stages of our cooperation, and it really shows you very well what I just spoke about.
Overlooking Austria's remarkable Wachau Valley is the gracious Gutwijk Abbey. Built on land donated by Passau's Bishop Altman, this stunning Baroque monastery complex, inspired by Spain's Escorial, is actually the 3rd version, with fires destroying most of the monastery in 1580 and again in 1718.
The monastery is 900 years old. Gutwijk is a very special place with a great history. It is a spiritual place, a place for freedom, a place for peace. It is a place where the people come together and they go away with much power in the heart.
Gutwijk is a Benedictine monastery, an order founded by Saint Benedict of Nursia, a 6th century monk who established the Abbey of Monte Cassino on a hilltop southeast of Rome around 529 AD. An astute and critical scholar of religious practices, Saint Benedict clarified the way European monasteries are organized, how monks should live and work, and what the focus of their religious life should be. His thoughts evolved into the book The Rule of Saint Benedict, a guide for balancing prayer, reading and work. Ora, lege et labora in Latin.
Ora, pray. Labora, work. And lege means to read. St. Benedict ordered every monk of his monastery must learn to read and to write. Everybody should read the gospel for himself. In the daily life of the monks until now, every monk there is a time reserved to read.
And I understand also during meals, you have silent meals, but there is a reader.
Yes, the reader has the possibility to eat afterwards. We read during the lunch and in the suppers in the evening,
Yes.
both.
And I noticed in your private quarters, you have a special reading chair.
I like to sit there reading. It makes the view wide and large.
From the beginning, Göteborg has operated differently than most Benedictine monasteries.
We are not so contemplative in our life like other Benedictines. For example, the French monasteries are all contemplative. They do not go outside.
Göteborg always focused on outreach, which was a blessing when Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II began his massive reforms.
Monasteries which have been contemplative, Joseph II says that is not necessary. We need parish priests, we need monks and sisters in the hospitals, we need monks and sisters in the schools, all others you can forget. He dissolved 700 monasteries, but Göteborg survived.
Today, Göteborg continues to focus on the world beyond the monastery walls.
We care for many parishes, 35 at the moment. We take care for schools.
You are teaching in the high schools.
Yes, philosophy. And we have some in the hospitals. We have a house for retreats and a house for young people.
I understand you've also gotten involved with the immigration situation.
Yes, that's nothing new for us. Every crisis, if it has been Poland, if it has been Croatia, we have always refugees in our monastery. And at the moment, it's families of Syria. We try to help so good as possible.
While Göteborg is headed by Abbot Columban, I was surprised to learn he has a cabinet of sorts, and that all the monks have a voice in leadership and the direction of the monastery.
I'm elected by the brothers, and then there is the second man on my side is the prior, then the third man is the sub-prior, and then the monks. There are 5 persons, and if there is a problem in the monastery, I call these 5, come and we have a discussion how to solve.
So every vote for every layer counts equally?
That's equally, yes.
Equal count,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a democratic system which reached back to the 6th century of St. Benedict. It's no creation of our time, but it's very, very modern.
To fund Göteborg's many parishes and support programs, the monastery's extensive lands are put to work, with more than 13,000 acres of woodlands being selectively harvested to ensure this treasured forest endures the test of time. The slopes around Göteborg are also used to produce the grapes that create the wines for which the Wachau is famous. Grüne Veltliner, Riesling, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, as well as wines used in Holy Mass. And then there's the Marille, another Wachau favorite. It's also grown under the watchful eye of Göteborg monks, in partnership with nearby orchards and right on the monastery grounds.
That's very nice.
transformed into tasty juices, jams, and even schnapps. Ultimately, the Marille is yet another way for Götvik to continue and enhance its community outreach. Though Götvik has survived nearly 10 centuries, serving amid the distractions of the modern world has perhaps never been more daunting, requiring absolute focus from every monk.
I think the rule of Saint Benedict will help the monk to be a man who has a good disposition to heaven, but also good disposition to the earth. It is important that the monk lives his vocation, not only in the monastery, but also outside the monastery. I think everybody can be happy in his life. If I'm in a family, or if I'm alone, if I'm a monk in a monastery, it is important that I live that what I see that is my vocation.
At Götvik, I experienced calmness, a sense of peace, and moments of spontaneous joy. It wasn't the world I'd imagined, but rather one rich in history and spirit, shared by some of the friendliest people I've met.
We are delighted to welcome Viking guests to Götvik Abbey.
Götvik opens the door to an intriguing world that I found fascinating. I hope you too will have the chance to explore its many treasures.
So we hope that you then have some time in the afternoon through the Wachau Valley to relax and enjoy the scenery from the sun deck or from the aquavit terrace, because then when you get to Passau the next day, there is just such an awful lot to do again that we would really want you to be energized and ready to go. Passau sits on the confluence of 3 rivers, the Ilz, the Inn, and the Danube. And it is really a very, very spectacular setting. It allows you to walk up some hills, overlook the city as it sits there with all these rivers coming from different sides, and they really, the city sits on a peninsula. It's just such a beautiful location, and there are so many different vantage points around the city. We will introduce the city itself to you, the old town, through a walking tour. And that is really to give you an orientation and to get a sense of the history of the city. And then there are a whole host of other things that you can do. There are a few full day programs. There are some afternoon programs. And I will just pick a few of them that I really think you would enjoy. We have, for instance, recreated a Bavarian beer fest for an afternoon experience. Keep in mind that a true Bavarian beer fest, as you may know, will run several days, and it starts very early in the morning. And that is, we believe, maybe not exactly to your liking. So we have taken an afternoon where we bring you to a location just outside of Passau, and with the people that own the location, we have created a program that gives you little bits and pieces of that Bavarian beer culture, the food that goes with it, the music that goes with it. It's really a really nice flavor of Bavaria, to get a sense of Bavaria with your ears, with your mouth, and with your eyes. Then there is a quite a spectacular way of experiencing what Passau and the surrounding countryside have to offer, and that is a fixed wing flight to Neuschwanstein. And the castle's name may not ring a bell. It sounds very German, of course, but it is the inspiration for Walt Disney's Cinderella Castle. And it's such an iconic part of Bavaria. It was built by a man who was called Mad King Ludwig. And he was called mad because he was a little strange, maybe. He had very exotic tastes, and he built a number of these palaces that seemed to come out of medieval fairy tales, and that's what Neuschwanstein is as well. A very eccentric man, but certainly someone who left his mark on Bavaria in the shape of these castles and these palaces. It's a full day program that really gives you a big slice of Bavaria and the Bavarian Alps. There is also an opportunity to spend the day in Salzburg. And Salzburg, of course, is best known as the backdrop for the Julie Andrews film, The Sound of Music. It is also, and that's probably more important to the Austrians, it's also really one of the very important cities in the musical tradition, musical history, but also the musical presence of Austria. The Salzburger Festspiele still today are among the great highlights of the musical year in Austria. And of course, Mozart lived there and worked there, has left his traces in Salzburg. So it's really a city that offers you layer upon layer of history and culture, and perhaps especially for an American audience, of course, culminating in that part of history that is depicted in The Sound of Music. Regensburg is one of the oldest cities in Germany, and its history is full of anecdotes and legends that your guides will share with you to make for a really lively walking tour. There are just a lot of fun stories about Regensburg. There's also an opportunity here to join a tour that focuses on the Jewish history of Regensburg. At one time, Regensburg had a very large Jewish community, and the vestiges of that are really well preserved now and are accessible to people that are so interested. I haven't mentioned this yet, but in Hungary, if you have a little bit of extra time in Budapest, there is also a way to tour the old Jewish quarter of that city and visit the Grand Synagogue in Budapest. Very interesting, very important part of Central Europe's history. In the afternoon in Regensburg, there are a number of things that you can do. I've mentioned visiting the microbreweries in the area surrounding Regensburg, and you will have noticed that from the Wachau Valley, that is known for its wine, in this part of Bavaria there where you have arrived, beer is what people drink. And the microbreweries are just a perfect example of this. You can also visit Weltenburg Abbey, and that abbey is part of that Central European tradition of Baroque abbeys with beautiful decorations, with pastel-colored murals and ceiling frescoes. Weltenburg Abbey is certainly one of the best preserved and one of the most beautiful churches that you could visit anywhere in the Danube area. Another option from Regensburg is to visit the nearby city of Nuremberg. And there are few cities in Germany that can match Nuremberg's significance in history. Not only is it a city that was already very large and important in the Renaissance and earlier than that in the times where the emperor would travel from city to city. Nuremberg was one of the imperial cities. That meant that the emperor would spend some time there in his court that would travel from place to place. And the imperial castle still overlooks the city today. It became a focal point because of this imperial history during the Third Reich, with the Nazi rallying grounds, and the remnants of those are still in Nuremberg and they will be visited on this tour. After the war, the Allies decided that Nuremberg was, because of this significance in the Third Reich, it would also be a really good city to hold judgment over what had happened during the Third Reich. And that made Nuremberg the city of the trials. And all of these locations can be visited on this tour. You will get a complete overview of that really significant role that Nuremberg played in Germany's history. Aside from that, although it was very badly damaged during World War II, it has been rebuilt, and there's an awful lot of beautiful buildings and churches and houses to visit and see. There are beautiful fountains, one actually so beautiful that it's simply called the Beautiful Fountain, and it's a great place to do a little bit of shopping. On day 8 in Regensburg, that is where the cruise ends. But if you want to, and we would surely like to, stay a little longer with us, you have a number of options. One of them is to spend 3 nights with us in Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic, and just one of the most beautiful, wonderful cities in Central Europe. There is another way to spend more time in Nuremberg on a 2-night extension, and then you can combine the two for a 4-night extension in Nuremberg and in Prague. And both cities really deserve a closer look. Prague in particular has so much to offer in the way of culture, in the way of food, in the way of architecture. It's one of the great Art Nouveau cities in Europe. It's also a spectacular city when it comes to Gothic architecture. The Prague Castle obviously stems from that era. We also have a great friend in Prague, William Lobkowitz. Prince William Lobkowitz has opened his palace in a way that is quite unique to Viking. And part of the extension program is that you have an opportunity to see what Karina and William Lobkowitz together have created, a unique experience for Viking visitors only. Another example of what we do with privileged access. Okay, so that was an introduction to the Romantic Danube. Thank you for staying with us, and we will now start to answer your questions. We've gotten quite a few of them during the program, but keep them coming. For me, it's the best part of the entire program to answer questions. And we have Heather, who will ask them for you, and I will try my very best to answer any and all of them. Heather, go ahead.
Thank you, Joost. Our first question tonight comes from Kerry Lee in Nottingham in the United Kingdom. She asks, why is it called the Romantic Danube?
Why is it called the Romantic Danube? It's been called the Romantic Danube for, I think for the 20 years that we've had this itinerary. It sounded like a great name, and there is something, of course, about the music along the Danube, and you think of Vienna and waltzing and these beautiful gowns and things like that. So we all thought it was a very romantic itinerary.
Thank you. Jean in Manchester in the United Kingdom asks, is it possible to visit Salzburg during this trip?
Yes, it is. It's a day trip from Passau. It takes a little bit of driving, but you still have a fairly decent amount of time in the city itself to walk around, to see some of the sites that are associated with Sound of Music, to do a little bit of shopping. And for anyone really interested in classical music, there's also time to visit the Mozart house in Salzburg. So yes.
Thank you. Judy in the United States says, we are scheduled to do this cruise in December. Can you tell me how the Christmas market fits in with the regular itinerary? She says, we're looking forward to doing another Viking cruise.
Yes, the Christmas markets. And this is, there are other questions about the Christmas markets. What I would say is do it twice. Do it once in summer, do it once when the Christmas markets are on. So the itineraries don't need to be adjusted all that much to allow people to visit the Christmas markets. There's enough time in port to spend your free time roaming these Christmas markets, and all the cities along the Romantic Danube have them. Even the very small cities usually have at least a little bit of something, but Vienna has spectacular Christmas markets. Budapest does. Passau, Regensburg, I love. I remember that. I visited that one many years ago with my wife, and that was her first introduction to the German Christmas markets. She still talks about it, and when we put up our Christmas tree, there's an awful lot of stuff that comes from that trip in the actual tree. So yes, there's lots of time to visit the Christmas markets. Yes.
Thank you. Cherry in San Diego says, which local wines are the best to taste along this journey?
Austrian wines. Drink all the Austrian wines you can get. The most famous in the Wachau is the Grüner Veltliner. And it's a wine that by now you can also get in the US. But for years, the production was just not big enough. And for the really good wines, it's still not big enough to export it. The Austrians all drink it themselves, and the only way to get to some of these is to travel to Austria, and then we have these on the ship. We serve Grüner Veltliner on the ship, and in any of the ports that you stop at, you can also just bring a bottle. We will uncork it for you. There are no corkage fees, and you can drink it on the ship, because that is a really important part of the whole experience.
Thank you. Renee in Frisco in the United States says, we are scheduled for this trip in August and are wondering what's the best way to spend our extra days in Prague?
Extra days in Prague. Prague is just such a wonderful city to just walk around in. I will preface anything I say with that, because there are great attractions, but you should just spend time pounding the pavement if your stamina allows it. I would just spend 2 days walking around and seeing what I could find. Prague Castle is a must. It's where they have the great cathedral. It's where they have Franz Kafka's house. It's where they have the beautiful Lobkowitz Palace that you would have all the time in the world for. And that's really almost, at least half a day, if not more. My favorite thing in Prague is really the House of the Community. And it has a very complicated Czech name, but it's an Art Nouveau building. Prague is known for that architectural style, and it's a building that you can visit. It has 2 cafes that you can just sit in and have a cup of coffee, and then you can also just wander around a little bit. They'll let you do that, and it's just an incredibly beautiful building. That's kind of my, quick short list of things. You need to walk across the Charles Bridge, up and down a little bit. There's a lot of life there going on, and see opera or go to an evening program. It's a very, the cultural hub of the Czech Republic, and so it has an awful lot to offer in the way of music, both classical and popular, and opera. So 2 days is you can easily spend a week in Prague, but 2 days, 3 days is a good start.
Thank you. Janice in Stevenage in the United Kingdom, she asks, what is the best time of year for a river cruise down the Danube?
The best time of year, it really depends on what it is that you're looking for. So we talked about the Christmas markets. Spring is beautiful because it doesn't get too hot. If you're sensitive to that, I wouldn't travel, for instance, in August because it gets hot every once in a while. It can get hot in Vienna, and it can get hot in Budapest. If you like it that way, though, then as far as weather is concerned, in August and in September, you're most likely not to have a drop of rain. In spring, you'll probably have a day or two where there's a little bit of rain. So it really depends. And I know that that's not the answer people are looking for, but every season kind of has its own charms. The next question, Heather, I'm sure is going to come up is, what's the best time of year to travel if I want to avoid high or low water? And that's also a difficult question to answer because, again, the rivers sit in a temperate climate, and a temperate climate, it's very different, let's say, from the Western United States, where there's a rainy season and then there's a long drought during summer. Rain falls throughout the year in much of Europe. And so to answer the question, when is high and when is low water, is really not that easy. There is a bigger chance of a little bit of high water early on in the season. But again, you have great temperatures, the crowds are a little bit less. It's a balancing act, and it's really hard to predict what you can expect when you're there. What I can tell you is that whether it's high water, a little bit of low water, high temperatures, low temperatures, we have dealt with all of this, and we accommodate, we work with these, with the circumstances, and I don't believe that you can have a bad cruise here on the Danube any time of year.
Thank you, Joost. Just linked to that, Mary in Mount Dora in the United States. So she will be travelling at the end of May. She says, it will be my first trip to Europe and I'm very excited. What should I expect regarding the weather, which I know you've just covered, and what clothing will be appropriate for the excursions and time on board?
I think, yes, so you always want layering, so that you can, you can add or subtract as necessary for the temperatures. In the evenings, at dinner time, we're not a very formal company, but a lot of people like to dress up a little bit. And if you decide to join us to the concert in Vienna, this evening concert, a lot of people just like to dress up a little bit. So I would take a nice dress, I would take a jacket. I personally wouldn't fuss with a tie, but some people feel that if you wear a jacket, you have to have a tie. It's It's up to you by and large, and you need some layers. But don't bring tuxedos and don't bring too much formal wear, I would say.
Thank you. Jean in St. Louis in the United States asks, what is the Wachau Valley named after?
It's lost in time. So the Wachau itself, the name comes from an 8th century word that probably sounded something like Wachauam, but what that actually meant is lost. No one knows.
Thank you. Kathleen in Corvallis in the United States asks, where does the ship dock for visiting Vienna? Is there a way for passengers to get into the city on their own?
Yes. So the Danube doesn't run through Vienna as it does in Budapest. You know, the Danube really bisects that city. And you're right there on the water. Everything happens on the water. The Danube kind of makes this bend around the city. And where we dock, you either take a coach into the city. It's really easy though. It's a 5-minute walk to a subway station. And the subway in Vienna is very different from, let's say, the subway in New York. It's clean. It's easy to navigate. It's great fun because you get to meet the Viennese, and it's one straight shot from where the ship docks to the Opera House, which is where most people then get out of the subway to explore the city. So the answer is, it's really easy. It's also something that you can practice a little bit during some of our excursions, because where we can, we make use of public transportation to get people acquainted with it so that in the afternoon they can do it again on their own.
Thank you. Camille in Tustin in the United States asks, how long is the Budapest pre-trip?
It's 2 nights. And depending on when you arrive, that gives you 2 to 2.5 days to explore the city a little bit on your own. Depending on which direction you travel in, the Regensburg to Budapest direction spends more time in Budapest, and you have a little bit less time seeing the Danube bend. And when you go from Budapest to Regensburg, you do have that afternoon cruising through the Danube bend. That means that you don't have as much time in Budapest on that direction. So that's the Budapest to Regensburg direction. So if you book a pre-extension, those 2 days are what you really need. I feel you should really do those 2 extra nights because Budapest is just such a phenomenal city. And again, you want to walk around, just let things, you will encounter things that are just interesting to see and to do. You need to sit in a cafe and have some hot chocolate or have some vlodny cake. That's Flodni. And you should visit the old Jewish quarter. You need to go to Heroes Square to really study the monuments there. There's just so much to do that, again, after 2 days, you'll have a good sense of Budapest and you will want to still come back.
Thank you, Joost. Leslie in Poulsbo in the United States, she says, when in Budapest and Vienna on the included tour, are you able to get out and go into the sites, or do you drive by only?
The city tours are really meant to give you an overview. So yes, there is some getting off the coach and walking around a little bit, but the whole idea of these, particularly in Vienna, where you have an afternoon off, and where you can really spend a lot of time the next day as well. The whole idea is to give you an introduction, to familiarize yourself enough so that when you then strike out on your own, it looks familiar enough to get to be comfortable. That's really the idea.
Thank you. Linda in the United States says, could you tell us what is the difference between the Danube Waltz cruise and the Romantic Danube cruise?
Some of the cities are different. The Danube Waltz visits Bratislava directly. You don't have to book an excursion to go from Vienna back to Bratislava. And the Danube Waltz stops in Passau. So the timing in all of these ports is a little different. And it's really worth, in preparation, Either talk to your travel agent or call us and find out exactly, you know, how much time in each port you spend, and spend a little bit of time reading up on the places. You know, go on our website and look at the resources we have. There are reading lists, there are our movie lists. Do a little bit of prep work and then pick whatever works the best for you. They overlap, but they're different in some in particular bits and pieces. They definitely are.
Thank you. David in Darien in the United States says, can you visit Schönbrunn Palace while in Vienna?
Yes. We organize an excursion there, and that gives you a guided tour, a little bit of free time. Again, on the when we do the Christmas markets there, Schönbrunn actually has a beautiful Christmas market, and you'll have time to visit that. But yes, and I would recommend it. The palaces of Vienna are just such a, you know, they remind you of when Vienna was kind of the belly button of the known universe. And there's just so much of it left, and it's also just so fascinating, and so it's gorgeous.
Thank you. Heather in Canada says, does the Budapest to Amsterdam journey include the same tours that you've described today?
By and large, it does. Again, just like what I said, you know, the difference between the Romantic Danube and the Danube Waltz. If you have a little bit of time to prepare, and if you can focus a little bit on, okay, well, these are really the places where I want to spend a lot of time, you can always ask the question. But yes, the Amsterdam to Budapest journey overlaps a lot with the Romantic Danube. Yeah.
Thank you. Becky in West St. Paul in the United States says, what was the fruit that was mentioned which was grown at the Abbey? It looks like apricots.
They're little apricots. They're about the size of cherries. So I'm saying little apricots, but they're marillen, M-A-R-I-L-L-E-N. And you Google that, or you look it up in Wikipedia, and it will tell you it's an apricot, and it really isn't. It has quite a distinct taste. It has a much smoother skin than an apricot. It's much juicier, and it's really a fruit of its own.
Thank you. Sheila in Oak Ridge in the United States says, we are booked on the September 2022 cruise. First of all, she'd like to know, when will she be able to sign up for the tours? And logistically, will they be able to do more than one tour in a day?
I like that. That's ambitious. The answer to the second part of the question is yes, you will be able to do more than one tour a day. It takes some scheduling. Generally on the river cruises, as we secure this, the if you will, you know, and I know that sounds a little technical, but once we secure the inventory for these excursions, for these activities, they will be put online, and you can start looking into them, and you can start booking. And it's usually a good idea to check in every once in a while, because if we find something, let's say, you know, for September, you should already be able to book today. But there's a reasonable chance that we will add some things in the months that are still ahead of us. So it's probably a good idea to keep an eye on things a little bit. The great thing also about river cruising is that generally we try to come up with a lot of experiences. The river ships are relatively small. You have 190 guests. We try to come up with experiences that everyone can participate in. So you don't really have to worry about things getting sold out, with few exceptions. There will always be space for you.
Thank you. Betsy in the United States, she says, if I wanted to go and see Berlin, would I just plan this myself?
Yes, Berlin from this is quite a ways away, and you know what you should really do, and I know this sounds like a shameless plug, and maybe it is, but what you should do is book an Elbe cruise and tack Berlin on. You know, you already have some time in Berlin. You tack in on some extra time, and the Elbe cruise, and I know that's not what we're talking about today, but the Elbe cruise is such a beautiful little cruise. if you want to get really spectacular, what you would do is you would hook up an Elbe cruise that ends in Prague. You would spend some time in Prague and then go from Prague to Regensburg to do your Romantic Danube. And you kind of have this Central European extravaganza. Don't try to cram too much into one holiday. Spread it out a little bit, because Berlin is a city where you need to spend 3 days, in my mind.
Thank you. The same question has come in both from John in the United States and Bruce. They say, is it possible to visit Melk Abbey?
Is it possible to visit Melk Abbey on this cruise? Yes, it is, but you would have to work that out on your own a little bit. And we really believe that we've gotten such a great alternative to Melk by going behind the scenes at Gutbike, that we, I don't know if I would do it. Honestly, the church at Melk is absolutely spectacular, and that's usually what attracts people there. But to get an abbey where you can actually kind of, really get a sense of what people are doing there. It's so much more of a living thing, if you know what I mean. I mean, Melk is somewhat more of has a museum quality to it. So it's possible. It's absolutely doable. It will require a little bit of help probably from the people on the ship, and they will be able to help you with this. Yeah.
Thank you. We have two questions about the optional excursion to Neuschwanstein. Bonnie would like to know if this is available in December, and Don wonders if we could give him a rough idea of the per person cost to do this flight extension.
To begin with the last one, it's expensive. It's a small little plane. It's several $100s, but off the top of my head, I don't know more. You would have to, you can call, they can tell you exactly how much it is. As to flying in December, that's tricky. If the weather is okay, then we will do it, no doubt. But the season is usually kind of limited to really good weather flying. They're small aircrafts, and they can't be in the air at all times in all kinds of weather. So there's a reasonable chance, I would imagine, that in December flights are a little iffy.
Thank you. Roger in Milford in the United States says, is it possible to arrive 2 days early at the beginning of the tour? How does that work with the included airfare?
You would, what you're trying to do is a deviation, and generally that will bring with it a small fee. It's essentially what we do for all of these cruises is we set up these standard contracts with the airlines, and it's a little easier to slot you into one of those than it is to get you on a different plane. So it's entirely possible. It just there's a small fee. I believe it's $50 to get exactly what you need. But have at it. I mean, I think you should do it that way.
Thank you. Question from Linda in the United States. Is Cafe Saka easy to locate, and is Sakatorte served on board the ship?
Last things first, yes, Sakatorte is available on the ship, and yes, it's really easy to locate. It sits almost right on top of the subway stop that you would use. It's also right next to the opera, so it's smack dab in the middle of Vienna. I don't think that you should limit yourself to one piece of cake in Vienna, though. I think that would be a mistake.
Thanks, Joost. Steve in Las Vegas says, when is the best time of year to see the flowers in bloom?
That would be in April, May. Yeah. In June, it gets warm again already. So, that's when I would go, April, May.
Thank you. Greg in Asheville in the United States says, can you still visit St. Stephen's in Passau? Are organ concerts still available?
Yes, the organ concerts still take place, and you can still visit St. Stephen's. It's simply a matter. They do a lot of walk-in traffic. It's simply a matter of going there, and you could check online, but most of the time you can just go there, pay the ticket fee for the concert, and do it that way. Yes.
Thank you. Carol in the United States says, in the last day in Regensburg before disembarking, is it possible to fit in a train ride to Rothenburg to sightsee for a couple of hours, or is it better to do that from the Nuremberg and Prague extension?
Rothenburg is it's small, and that's an enormous part of its charm, of course. That also means that it's not that easy to get to by public transport. So what I would do if you're interested in the Romantic Danube, but you really also want to go to Rothenburg, is I would book an Amsterdam to Budapest cruise, because then you have the opportunity to visit Rothenburg from Würzburg, and that's really the way to do it. From Würzburg, it's a relatively short ride. We offer this with a lunch in Rothenburg. I think that's really how you want to do that, because to do it from either Regensburg or from Nuremberg, I believe it's possible, but you'll have to kind of navigate local trains and possibly buses. I think that's a stretch. Sorry.
Thank you. Greg in Asheville says, is there a pre-cruise extension in Munich or Salzburg? And he says, has a tour of the Red Bull Hangar 7 aircraft collection ever been considered?
Again, to start with the last question, no, we have not really thought about that yet. And that's really just a function of, how many new things can we introduce every year. I'm sure that at some stage we will. Salzburg, to many of our guests, is still the city of Mozart, the city of the Salzburger Festspiele, the city of the sound of music. And Red Bull is only, kind of a recent addition. The extensions, we have Munich extensions and Salzburg extensions on the Danube walls, not on the Romantic Danube.
Thank you. Kathleen in the United States says, does the ship provide umbrellas to borrow for going ashore independently?
Yes. Huge umbrellas that keep you dry, in Viking red with the Viking logo, so that we can always find you in the crowds if we have to. Yeah.
Thank you. Patricia in the United States says, will there be time in Nuremberg to see the courtroom where the trials were conducted?
The courtrooms in Nuremberg, yes, are quite often part of a special tour that we offer in Nuremberg that really focuses on what I would call 20th century history in Nuremberg. There's always a chance that there's actually a trial going on, and in that case, that courtroom might just be occupied. So it's always I wouldn't say it's hit and miss, because it doesn't happen that often that it's closed. But there is an ever so slight chance that it will be. I would book the excursion. I would be prepared, and the chance of disappointment is relatively slim.
Thank you. Dana in the United States says, is it possible to enjoy dinner at a local cafe in Vienna?
Of course. I have to qualify that, though. The first answer is yes, but you don't really have dinner in cafes. The cafes in Vienna are meant to have your coffee and your cake, and you can have small little dishes. I would recommend that you go to, and the ship can help you with this. There are phenomenal restaurants in Vienna. You should. There's a little video that you can find on our website about Chef Murwald, and we have the younger Murwald, who is who's our vintner in the Wachau Valley, and then there's Tony Murwald, who's a famous chef in Vienna. And there's a little video that whets your appetite for things that you could do in Vienna. There are phenomenal restaurants, and we're always happy to help you Get either, you can go to a place that serves traditional Viennese food, but Austrian cuisine has an enormous reputation, and you can really do something from very high-end Michelin-starred dining to something that is a lot more traditional, and you can get like schnitzels that are about yay big. So lots of different choices.
Sounds great, thank you, Joost. Richard in Pompton Plains asks, is there an opportunity to visit Rothenburg with Viking?
Like I said, there are 2 cruises basically that you could do this on. One goes from Paris to Prague, and the other is the Grand European journey that goes from the Grand European tour that goes from Amsterdam to Budapest or vice versa. Those are 2 cruises that include Würzburg. The ship docks in Würzburg, and on those you visit Würzburg in the morning and Rothenburg in the afternoon.
Thank you. A question from Jean. She says, we're scheduled for the Grand European cruise in June, so we'll be on the Danube. If we do the Salzburg tour, will we miss seeing Passau?
Yes. There's no 2 ways around it. You'll have a little bit of time, and you will have to sail away or the sail in, depending on where you come from, and that's beautiful. But the Salzburg tour is a full day trip, and your time around that full day trip is limited.
Thank you. Linda in the United States asks, what time does the ship leave port from each city?
That is not an easy question to answer because it depends on which direction. Generally, what we try to do, and you can read up on you can always ask once you've kind of settled on when you want to travel. You can always call our call center and ask, or call your travel agent and ask. Generally, think about it in these terms. We try to give you, where we believe this is really important, we try to give you enough free time, like usually half a day, to do what you want to do or to book an optional excursion. And then we organize something for the other half of the day. On rare occasions do we not have any time outside of the organized excursions. And where we can, we give you an evening here or there. But of course, because you book a cruise, and so much of the beauty of river cruising is also just to see the landscape float by. There are afternoons where you're just cruising. And I know that that's a roundabout way of not exactly answering your question, but really, if you have very specific places where you're like, oh, I really need to make sure that I spend a lot of time there, it's best to just call the call center. If I rattle it down, in Regensburg, you have half a day to do whatever you want. In Passau, you have half a day to do whatever you want if you just stay with the included offer. When you travel through the Wachau, your time in Krems itself is somewhat limited. In Vienna, you have a day and a half. You have more than enough time. And in Budapest, it depends on which direction you take. And I've said it before, I sound like a broken record, but I would book the extra 2 days.
Thank you, Joost. Eleanor in Miami says, in Vienna, can we see the Lipizzaner horses? She says, we'll sail in September 2022 on the Danube Waltz.
You very often can. What I would do is go on their website and book the actual show there. You can usually in Vienna itself get last minute tickets on the day of or a few days ahead of time. And if you want to do it, if you wanted to do it a few days ahead of time, if you're not quite sure and you want to think about it a little bit more, you can ask the ship to book a reservation for you.
Thank you. A question from Kathleen. She says, are guests ever allowed on board the ship? She has a prospective son-in-law in town along the route.
No. And that just has to do with nautical safety, security, things of that nature. It's a pretty solid no.
Thank you, Joost. Letty in Falls Church in the United States asks, is it possible to tour Dürnstein?
Dürnstein is not on this itinerary. It is not so far from Krems. So you could do it, but then you would have to forfeit the visit to Götvik, which I wouldn't do. So to do that on your own is a little tricky. You can always ask if that's really what you have your heart and mind set to. The ship can help you do it. Sure.
Thank you. William in Bridgewater in the United States says, is it feasible to visit Berchtesgaden from Salzburg?
No, don't try it. It'll just create stress. And the difficulty is you will look at a map and you're like, well, that's not so bad. The problem in and around Berchtesgaden is the roads. They're all country roads. They tend to get very clogged. So you would have to do it on your own because we cannot offer it because of these reasons. We would not be able to pull it off consistently. And I wouldn't recommend striking out on your own on that one.
Thank you, Joost. This is a comment from Zana in the United States. She says there are many locks to travel through on the Danube cruises. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about those?
Actually, on this one, so let me count. So from Budapest, between Budapest and Vienna, there are about 3 locks. One is the lock in Kapcikovo, which is enormous, and it's in the middle of the Danube where it's really wide. And it's an interesting one. Now, it could be that you have to stay up late as we go through it. Then there's a lock just before Vienna. There is no lock between Vienna and Passau. And then between Passau and Regensburg, you may go through one lock depending on exactly where you dock. So on this particular stretch, there aren't that many locks. But look, going through a lock the first time you do it is a really cool experience. And depending on the size of the lock, it can be very different. Like the lock in Kapcikovo is just this enormous, huge tub. You don't lift very high, but it's quite an installation that surrounds you, and it's really, really interesting. And then there are some locks that are smallish. The ship just fits right in. And when you're at the bottom of a lock, you look up and there are these concrete walls that completely close you in. And some of these locks, you're lifted up some 50 feet. So they can be quite spectacular. Now, if locks are your thing, then you really need to think about cruising the stretch between, it's Amsterdam, Budapest has good locks. Prague to Paris has good locks. And they really range from these really steep cavernous locks on the Rhine-Main-Danube Canal just south of Nuremberg to the very small little locks on the Main River that every time just lift you maybe anywhere between 5 and 10 feet. The Main has a lot of locks. The Rhine, for instance, has hardly any. But it's always a great experience. I have to say that if you do it on the Main, there are quite a few of them, and I bet you that at some stage you will not wait up for them anymore because they become kind of, it's not like seen one lock, seen them all, but you get used to them after a while.
Thank you, Joost. Rita in the United States says, are there any evening activities on board? And if so, what are they?
Yes, there are evening activities on board. What exactly they are depends a little bit on when you cruise, the particular cruise, because we bring on board lecturers, people from the outside that have interesting stories to tell. We have an onboard musician. We have evening programs in cities where we can go out. And quite often we bring on board local entertainment, people that play traditional music maybe, that have good stories to tell. So yes, there is evening entertainment. It all takes place in the lounge. It's a relatively small space, so don't expect Vegas-style shows. But we do try really hard to bring, if you will, in the evening when you want to stay on the ship, we just bring the destination to you on the ship rather than you having to go out.
Great, thank you, Joost. And I think this is probably the last question we've got time for tonight. It's another one from Heather in Canada. She says, what direction do you recommend for the Rhine or Danube cruises?
That's always such an interesting question. The direction is, it's in my mind, it's a matter of taste. It really is. When I spoke about the Rhine, I also, answered that question. So let me try to answer it for this particular itinerary. So I think that here, I would probably favor Budapest to Regensburg. I'll tell you why. I would absolutely book 2 nights in Budapest so that I have all the time in the world to spend there. And then I would get on the cruise. The cruise has limited time in Budapest, and I would cruise to Regensburg. And then at the end of the cruise, I have, I can choose between Prague and Nuremberg, or I can do both of these cities. So I would end on a real high. I would start with a real high. And in between, there's so much to do. You can do it in the opposite direction. If you just do just the cruise, I would probably reverse my opinion and say I would end in Budapest, just because you would have more time in that direction. But like I said, the difference between the 2 directions is whether you have kind of a day and a half in Budapest or just 2 half days altogether. I think you need 2 days. So I would always say, have a little bit of extra time. So with extensions, book it from Budapest to Regensburg. If you don't want to book extensions, book it in the other direction.
Thank you, Joost. I think that's all we've got time for tonight.
Thank you, everyone. I enjoyed that. Hope to see you in the weeks to come.